If you could develop just one aspect of your personality, what would it be? Well, my name's Peter Sage, and on this video, I'm going to share with you why after 30 years of studying human behavior, there's only one answer. First of all, let's just remind ourselves of the difference between personality traits or character traits and physical attributes. Obviously, everybody knows what physical attributes are. You could be tall or short, or you could have blonde hair or blue eyes, etc. And a lot of that we take from our parents, and it's encoded into our DNA. In other words, we don't get to choose whether or not we want to be taller or shorter. But when it comes to our personality, that's a whole different game. Now, as human beings, we are the perfect encapsulation of both physical and non-physical in one package. And it's our character traits that are really the invisible parts that determine most of the quality of our life. Now, they express through our physical attributes, but really it's determined our success, our fulfillment, our levels of joy in relationships, not by our physicality, but by our personality. Now, you could say, oh yes, but physical attributes help. Well, there's a lot of good-looking single people out there that have no personality or have the wrong personality. And you can say, yes, but being tall helps when it comes to playing things like basketball. Well, go check out Spud Webb in 1986, who at 5'6" won the NBA Slam Dunk Championship. In other words, if you think that you haven't got the future or the life that you want because of your physical attributes, you're just telling a story and making excuses, and that's more of a personality problem, not a physical problem. So let's look at what are the most common personality types people associate with things like success. Well, common ones that people point to are things like motivation or discipline or desire or honesty. Let's just break those down for a second and see where they fit from my perspective. See, motivation is simply what's required to get you to do something that you don't really want to do. And it can be useful when you've got to get up early once to go catch a plane, but it's not something you want to rely on long term, as most people do. In fact, when you run out of motivation, you think that's called procrastination, but it's not. Motivation is completely opposite to something like inspiration. You don't need to be inspired to get up early to go do something you love. So motivation has its limits. If we take discipline, discipline is simply the process of building the character traits that you feel are required in order to move the quality of your life forward. Without the discipline, you may have the knowledge, but you don't have the initial action to get over the inertia that's caused you to be where you are. Put simply, discipline is simply keeping your word to yourself. But you can keep your word about things that don't really matter or aren't going to move the needle for you. For example, you can be very disciplined about finishing the series on Netflix that you want to watch, but that's not going to help you shift the needle when it comes to your bank balance. Then we have things like desire. Now, desire is very useful if you are in apathy or you've been playing the victim story, and desire can be useful to get your ass off the couch and doing stuff. But desire itself is usually fundamentally flawed because the presupposition of desire is I'm chasing something that I want and I'm not going to feel good enough about myself until I get it. That's the game most people play. Feel great when. And as discussed on many of my other videos, that's like running east looking for a sunset, thinking that you'll be happy at some point if you just work hard enough, run faster, or do some other strategy. That doesn't seem to be working. Now, when it comes to honesty, most people would class themselves as being honest. But I'm not talking about honesty in the context of not telling lies, because there is a big difference between not telling lies and being afraid of telling the truth. And that's what leads us more into the character trait that I would say is the number one that we should be working on. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is authenticity. Now, when it comes to authenticity, there is a bit of a paradox. Most people talk about authenticity, about something that they want to have, about a behavior that they're trying to do. And authenticity isn't something that you do, it's not something you have, it's something you are. So if you're trying to be authentic, by very definition, you're not being authentic because you're trying to go get something or be something that you already are to begin with. So if we define authenticity as being your true self, then we shouldn't have to look for it externally. If we're looking for it, we've already lost it. And that's the paradox around authenticity. Authenticity isn't the presence of something, but More accurately, it is the absence of what prevents it. What prevents most people from showing up is the masks that they wear over the top of their true selves. And those masks are usually worn to cover up the insecurities linked to the primary fears of the fear that we're not enough, or the fear we won't be loved, or the fear of not being able to handle uncertainty. So you see this so much in personal growth. Everybody's walking around telling everyone, hey, how you doing? I'm doing great. And their life's a shambles. Or, oh, how are you doing with your relationship? Oh no, everything's great. But they have no intimacy for the last 12 months. So when it comes to being authentic, the very first step is being comfortable to be able to tell the truth. Now, it doesn't mean to say you have to get on a soapbox and shout it at everybody, but if somebody asks you a question, you're no longer filtering it through what I call the good opinion of other people. You're being able to say, well, actually, right now, I'm just working through some stuff. Yeah, or, well, at the moment, yeah, I'm having some issues that I really need to go and work on myself to be able to resolve. Most people don't even know how to do that. Most people don't know how to apologize because they're too committed to being right because they're afraid of being wrong. Any perfectionists in the house? Great example. See, there is no such thing as perfectionism. Perfection is the lowest standard because it is unattainable. Instead, I don't look at perfectionism as a thing. I look at it as scared of screwing up-ism, because that, when you peel back the layers of the onion, is essentially what's going on. Of course, everybody wants to try to do their best, but trying to be perfect is usually covering up a fear that you're scared of not being good enough. And therefore, what will happen? What will people think? What will I think of myself? All of that stuff. We're not here to be perfect, guys. We're here to be authentic. You don't go to school and expect to get 100% in the exam. If you do, you're in the wrong class. And a lot of the time we learn more in Earth School from the wrong answers we give than the right answers. Nobody rides a two-wheeled bike without stabilizers or training wheels without falling off once in a while. Now, if you screw up in the relationship, that's because you're dealing with two different people with two different character traits, two different sets of values, histories, all of the things that people bring to the table into a crucible of learning that you're not going to get every answer right with. That's why I say, if you really want to be authentic around relationships, vulnerability and authenticity goes hand in hand. In other words, if you want to master a skill about relationships, master restoring connection. Most of the time, if you mess up, because we're human, your partner will understand, providing you're not trying to defend your position, but say, hey, listen, I screwed up. I'm not perfect. I'll try to do better next time. The level of authenticity that comes across with that, rather than trying to defend or conquer or justify or position, is something that is way more conducive to love and intimacy than most people being committed to being right about why the other partner's wrong, or making excuses for why you screwed up so that it softens the blow of thinking that it's not your fault. When it comes to things like business or agreements or giving your word, again, authenticity, same with honesty. It's about keeping your word and giving your word from a place of something that is your truth, not your expectation, wish list, hope that I am, or they want to hear this, so therefore I will say it. There's a lot of people that are running around trying to avoid rejection, and that comes up through people pleasing, and then they go cry themselves to sleep at night because their life doesn't really stack up to the fact that they think they have authentic friends. Why? Because they're not being authentic. They're just trying to please everybody, hoping that that means that they won't be rejected. See, when we're authentic, what actually starts to happen is we build trust. So when it comes to things like business, tell me yes or tell me no. I'm not afraid of what the answer is. I really want to know what it is, rather than you try to lead me down the garden path because you want to try to soften the blow because you're afraid of what you think I might think. So don't we all want to do business with people like that when it comes to that level of work? I may not like somebody, but I know I can trust them. In other words, authenticity is actually higher than my ability to want to like somebody. I value them, I respect them. The politician who is authentic, not many these days, but if they are, even if they're for the other party, you'll have a certain level of respect for them, even if you don't agree with what it is that they're putting forward as a policy. In other words, when it comes to authenticity, you are doing things for the right reasons, not anybody else's right reasons, for what you believe to be the right reasons. And you're not willing to compromise that because of trying to get in return some short-term level of approval, validation, connection, etc., or non-judgment. So doing what's right for you in your truth will lead you, in my experience, to a life that has more joy, more fulfillment, is less sticky, and gives more opportunities for you to grow into the potential of who you were born to become, rather than running around with all of these ankle weights, wondering why you're not floating to the surface of the river of life. In short, how do you become authentic? Let go of what's holding you back. Humility is also a very good vehicle. I'm always reminded of the quote from Mother Teresa, who said, "When you're humble, nothing can touch you, neither praise nor disgrace, because you know who you are." Think of what kind of power you could have walking through life, owning yourself, your imperfections, your greatness, all of that wrapped up in a place that, this is me. Now, if you'd like to learn more about authenticity and why we focus so much on it as part of my peer group, then click the link below. We have an entire module on understanding what authenticity is at a deep level, where we cover hours of content and material and exercises that allow you to let go of the masks that you wear and start showing up from a place of power, not a place of insecurity, even if it's unconscious, which for most people it is. So if you'd like to check out the training we have around that as part of my elite membership forum, click on the link and I'd be delighted to be able to take you further so that you can live a more authentic life and impact the people and the lives around you in a way where you can be the example, not the warning.